Hey guys, this is a Probing Paul video, my monthly Q&A, and I'm going to get to that in a second, but I wanted to start with a quick note about some of the stuff that's gone on over the weekend with the RTX 3090 two-way SLI overclocking.
Excellent!
iBuyPower wanted to make an affordable custom liquid-cooled desktop PC with hardline tubing. Three things allowed them to do it, and the now available Element CL. First, a custom front distribution plate holds the pump and reservoirs for standardized tube routing. Second, sliding mechanisms built into the front panel and CPU block allow the Element CL to support different motherboard and GPU layouts. And third, specialized push-to-connect fittings save time during assembly. If you want iBuyPower to build you a customized Element CL gaming PC, click the sponsor link in the video description. First off, I wanted to say a huge thank you to everyone who's been watching and engaging with this little bit of friendly competition because it's been a lot of fun. And then I wanted to say what an honor it is to accept the first place prize in the first round of this competition, that being the air-cooled competition. Jay posted his video with his air-cooling results this morning, and it seems like if you're looking at just the air-cooled results, I'm on top. I'm gonna credit my win with the structural support and all the engineering and design that went into my cardboard shroud here, as well as, of course, the jankiness of the setup, because as we all know, a janky setup is going to produce better results. Even Jay was forced to go with a bit of jank in his setup in order to get things going, but I am really happy to say that Jay, I gave him a little bit of a hard time in this first round, and he bounced around between a few different test beds, and you can probably see Jay eventually did go with some AC assisted cooling and the shroud, which he also bedecked with RIPGN and RIPPaul. Appreciate that. So my initial top score was 27,402, and as we can see, Jay ended his video with him beating me with a score of 27,431. However, that was not the end of the story. You see, the very night he posted this score of 27,431, beating me out, I went and followed it up, and I posted a score of 27,453. A small margin of error perhaps, but a win nonetheless, and that got me back into second place. I also want to point out that this is all air cooling here. This Tech Lab result is with LN2, and Kingpin, of course, is using his crazy LN2 setup that he has as well. But believe it or not, I was not even finished. I was actually sandbagging a bit. I had a score of 27,595 that I did not upload, and I was kind of hoping Jay was going to come back and do a little bit more air cooling and maybe beat me by 50 or 100 points, and then I could immediately have answered back with this. However, it seems that Jay has switched over to water cooling, so he is now in second place with a really, really nice score of 28,773. And make no mistake, he absolutely deserves this number 2 spot there. However, I do want to point out once again that these scores up here are LN2, and then Jay is using a setup with water-cooled EVGA cards, although I don't know the other details surrounding that because he hasn't posted a video on that. And of course, that's to be expected. Jay does a fair amount of water cooling. For round 1 with air cooling with AC assistance, though, I do believe 27,595 would be the score to beat, so I challenge anyone to beat that without removing the cooling solutions from your cards. But I don't know if 4th place is going to cut it for me, so I'm going to do a little bit more testing with these cards this week. I will make a video on it. I might succeed, I might fail, who knows. I do not have water blocks for these, so I'm going to have to figure something out. But my main goal really is just to have some fun with it, so that's what I'm going to try to do, and I'll have more content on this coming up this following week, whether I succeed or whether I fail. For now though, back to your regularly scheduled Probing Paul. So if you're not familiar with this series, it's a pretty standard Q&A. I answer tech questions for the most part, but random stuff as well, and all the questions from this month were taken from last month's Probing Paul in the comments section. So leave me a comment down there if you want me to answer it next month. Here's a look back through past Probing Pauls, and I feel like I want to zoom and enhance to get like all the way down that tunnel to see back to the first one, but it's getting further and further away now. Sometimes I make other statements at this point in the video, but don't have much to add for today, so let's get right into the questions. Joselito Jr. Serrano. Joselito? I'm sorry, I don't know how to pronounce that. But anyway, thank you for your question. Good day, Paul. I'm just wondering, does thermal paste still inside the container have an expiration date? And if it does, is there a huge temperature difference between before and after it expires? Just bought thermal paste, but still haven't used them all. Sorry if this question's already been asked. I don't think it has, but I feel like thermal paste is one of those things a lot of people get concerned about because they're not sure about it, especially for someone who hasn't gone through and like assembled the CPU cooler on the CPU, or who's never like disassembled a graphics card. If the thermal paste goes bad, people get a little bit sketchy about doing that disassembly and reapplication process. That said, once you sort of try it out, it's really not too difficult. But I think I'm getting ahead of myself because you asked about thermal paste that's still in the little container. And I will admit, I've got this baggie of thermal pastes that I've collected over time for quite some time. And I've got some pretty sketchy stuff in here too, like this thermal take tube that I feel like has been in here since I was still back at Newegg. So the manufacturer response that you will get if you ask them is that thermal paste has about a 3 to 5 year lifespan. And that's a generic answer for a question that has lots of potential nuance to it because there's lots of different mixtures that go into thermal paste. paste. They're not all the same. A lot of them have different materials that are used in them, but most of them, like this MX4 compound that Arctic makes that I use pretty often, will come in like a tube-like syringe like this. So as long as you're using it properly, you should get a fair amount of life out of it, because they will pretty much always have some sort of cap. So make sure to put the cap back on after you're done with it. If you squeeze paste out of the tube, don't like pull the plunger back out, because that will introduce air to it. You want to not expose it to air, but once you've used what you need and recapped it, it's best to store it kind of like you would a fine wine. Put it in a bag, keep it out of sunlight. You don't want light hitting it if you can avoid it, and keep it in a cool, dry place. In particular for storage, it's best to keep it from getting really, really hot. So this baggie that has been in my garage for a really long time, especially over the summer, it has gotten very hot at different times, I wouldn't necessarily trust. But there is a real world test you can do with thermal paste to see if it's still viable or not. It should have a smooth consistency, and if you squeeze some out of the tube, it shouldn't look like it's gunked up or separated in particular. If it is, you should toss it and get some new thermal paste. If it's still squeezing out normally and the consistency still seems appropriate to you, then you should be okay to still use it. If you're worried about thermal paste that's already installed on something like a graphics card, for example, there will pretty much always be paste between a CPU and the cooler, or between the actual GPU itself on a graphics card and the cooler, and that can dry out over time as well. And that's the main thing that causes thermal paste to fail, is it drying out. So for that, I would just monitor temperatures. And if you notice temperatures increasing significantly over time, and if you have a piece of hardware that's been in use for 3 to 5 years or more, then it's worth considering that the thermal paste might have started to fail or might have started to dry out. And in that case, you pretty much don't have any choice but to disassemble the thing, clean the thermal paste, and replace it. But if you like tinkering with PCs, then that's kind of a fun task to do anyway. But hopefully that answer helps you out, and thank you very much for the question. Next question is from Claymore, who asks, do the 3080 Founders Edition fans spin at idle? I live in a dusty environment, and this is very important to me. I am happy to report that none of the RTX 3080s or the 3090 that I've tested so far have fans that spin at idle. As long as the GPU temperature is low enough, the fans do not spin. And it's actually something that I intended to bring up in my review, but it's just something that got kind of lost in the mix, is I feel like the RTX 3080s in particular are kind of aggressive about keeping the frequencies down, thus keeping the temperatures down when you're not doing 3D rendering. So anytime that you're just showing 2D stuff on the screen, and that includes if you Alt-Tab out of a game so it's not doing the 3D rendering there anymore, I saw the GPU frequency drop to 210 megahertz, and it would just sit there. It wouldn't change at all, no matter what you would do, unless you would load up a game again. In that state, all of the GPUs, including the Founders Edition, just don't spin their fans at all, so they don't make any noise at all. And side benefit for you if you live in a dusty environment and you're concerned about dust buildup over time and minimizing that, or if, like me, you have like a home theater PC that doesn't have a case or enclosure around it, and you just want to minimize the dust buildup over time, going fanless is a good option, and these are essentially fanless when the fans aren't running. Technically saying fanless is probably a bit of a stretch there, but the point is the fans don't spin, so answer to your question is no? No, they don't spin at idle. Next question is from Chris MacArthur. Hey Paul, love the channel. Thank you, Chris. I was wondering if you have a TV with one HDMI variable refresh rate port, so that would be FreeSync or G-Sync. Can you use an Xbox and a computer with an AMD GPU in this case, with an HDMI switch? Do the switches support variable refresh rate? Do you think NVIDIA will support variable refresh rate over HDMI? That last question I can answer definitively yes, they already do. And in fact, there's a fair amount of LG TVs that already support NVIDIA G-Sync over HDMI. And in particular, if you're looking for HDMI 2.1 support, I did a video on the LG C10 65-inch TV a month or two ago, so check that out if you want a little bit more. To answer the question though, I did a little bit of searching and I was not able to find any HDMI switches that seem to indicate that they support variable refresh rate. In particular, if you're looking for higher refresh rate in general, it's difficult to find an HDMI switch that specifically says it supports that. Wendell at Level 1 Techs has actually developed, I believe, a DisplayPort 1.2 KVM switch that I believe does go up to 144 Hertz. But if you're specifically talking about gaming and you want to get a TV that's one of the newer TVs that supports variable refresh rate, and you have a PC that you want to plug into it, and you have an Xbox or another console that you want to plug into it, and both of those have variable refresh rate options that you want to take advantage of, I would absolutely make sure that your TV has multiple inputs that support variable refresh rate, because that's going to be the best solution for you, is a direct cable going from your graphics card or your game console to the TV. Even if there was an HDMI switch that did support variable refresh rate, which I'm almost positive that there is not right now, it would introduce some sort of lag or latency. And if you're gaming, you really want to minimize or reduce that or get rid of it as much as possible. So adding another device between your source and the TV would add some amount of additional latency, and you just don't want that. So if you have multiple devices that need to connect to a single TV and they both need variable refresh rate support, I would be absolutely sure that when you're buying that TV, it has multiple inputs that support variable refresh rate. And I believe, speaking specifically about the TV I recently reviewed in the LG C10, that it has multiple HDMI 2.1 inputs, and I believe any of those will support G-Sync. Here's sort of a follow-up question to that last one from Delcho Gorgiev. Hey Paul, long therm fan and I love your work. I'm also thermally in love with you, friend. I have no idea what I'm saying. I don't know what a long therm fan is, but I appreciate you nonetheless. I want to ask you, with the new HDMI standard and new GPUs, sorry, there's some funny typos in this, but with the new HDMI standard and the new GPUs, do I need to buy a new HDMI cable or will the old one work just fine? And I believe I've brought this up before, but I'm going to mention it again for anyone who is managing to get their hands on an RTX 30 series graphics card and does want that full HDMI 2.1 experience with 4K, 120 Hz, and HDR. You need an HDMI 2.1 cable. One of the old HDMI 1.4 or 2.0B cables or whatever will not work. Well, it'll work, but it won't work for the updated standard with the increased bandwidth to 48 gigabits per second. Fortunately, those are already available on sites like Amazon, and I just did a search here. I'm not vouching for these products, by the way, but it looks like you can find HDMI 2.1 cables for around $20 to $25. Not too bad. I'd make sure that the product you're buying actually says HDMI 2.1 on it, because there is a certification process by the HDMI triumvirate or whatever they're called, and they should all list this support 48 gigabits per second, which is the raw bandwidth for HDMI 2.1, and by default with those specs you should also get support for everything else like eARC and VRR and everything. But I will post a link to that in the description if you guys are interested. Next question from Silvio Alcantara. Paul, Silvio, have you asked the question before? Your name sounds familiar. Anyway, Paul, I have a question. Whatever happened to the X299 platform? Thank you for all your videos. Silvio, a good question, and you know, for anyone who follows the high-end desktop space, it might seem like the X299 has just sort of evaporated and gone away over the past few years, and it kind of has, but it is still around. It is still Intel's high-end desktop platform. They haven't replaced it with anything, except maybe the platform that you can run an Intel Xeon W175X processor on, because this is sort of their top consumer/prosumer processor with 28 cores and everything. This is what they're putting up against Threadripper. But these don't work with X299, which is socket LGA 2066. These are socket LGA 3647, so there's a limited number of motherboards that work with these. Well, first off, in 2017, there was kind of an AMD kill shot that came out of nowhere from it, which is the launch of the original Threadripper, which was in August of 2017, about 3 years ago. That one blew a lot of people away because Ryzen was expected. A lot of people saw Ryzen coming and the refreshed desktop platform and everything. And it took, I'd say, you know, a good year before that really started to gain traction. And then things improved with the 2000 series Ryzen and everything. But then suddenly as Ryzen was coming out, they're like, oh, and we also have this new high-end desktop platform. How about that? And that used the X399 chipset and the original Threadripper socket. And right out of the gate there, they had the 1950X, which was a 16-core, 32-thread processor, which really outperformed Intel's CPUs, especially if you're looking at the price comparisons to them, because Intel's top CPU at the time, I believe, was still the $2,000 10-core. And basically that first generation of Threadripper, and then followed up by a second generation, and now they're in third generation Threadripper, kind of blew Intel's offerings out of the water in the high-end desktop space. So you had some really significant competition come in, and I think AMD was able to keep that secret enough that it kind of caught Intel off guard. At the same time, Intel has had well-documented issues with their 10 nanometer process and making upgrades there, so that's been so slow coming. So because of that, all their stuff is still based on 14 nanometers, so there really hasn't been much change in the CPUs available for X299 or anything that would warrant a switch to a new platform. Finally, X299 and the high-end desktop CPUs that go along with it really got squeezed, I'd say, from both sides. On the one hand, by stuff like the 3175X, which came out a little bit later, but Intel realized, I think, that they weren't going to be able to compete with AMD with the LGA 2066 socket, so they had to go to something bigger, and that's what allowed them to get an actual 28-core SKU launched. But high-end desktop in the past has always been like, oh, that's the top end, that's the best. So this is now the best. So if people are like, well, well, what's the best Intel can offer? You don't talk about X299 anymore, you talk about LGA 3647. Then at the bottom end, for like the more kind of entry-level X299 stuff, and remember, on that platform, they had like a quad-core CPU with the 70, whatever this stupid CPU was called. It was a dumb CPU. But then you had AMD coming out with 8-core, and then 12-core, and then 16-core processors. So suddenly, even those relatively higher core counts that you did still have available on X299 were being supplanted by AMD's offerings that cost a lot less, that have motherboards that you could get for a lot less. And these really high core and thread count CPUs were just really competitive with X299 stuff, and it sort of became an irrelevant platform, I think. It's kind of sad because I had a few really nice X299 systems over the year that have kind of lost a little bit of their luster, but that's my assessment for why you don't really hear about X299 anymore. Just a few more questions. This one from Toonami20. What motherboard and Ryzen processor would you recommend for high-end streaming and video editing build? There is no price listed here. That would be an important third factor. You put Ryzen in here, so I don't think you're going for a high-end desktop platform, so my answer for you would be the 3900X, which you can get for as little as $430 right now, and I would pair this with a nice X570 motherboard. That said, we are expecting new processors, probably within the next month. In fact, within about a week of this video going live, AMD is making some announcements, so I am telling you my answer for right now, but I would absolutely wait at least for that week to go by so you can see what comes out and if these prices change and if you might be able to get more bang for your buck once the new stuff launches. The rumor is that there is going to be a 5900X, which will also be a 12-core, so I would keep my eye on that one in particular. Also rumored is 10-core and 8-core varieties with the new Zen 3 microarchitecture. So be patient for now, but as far as a motherboard goes, I would recommend an X570 motherboard, and you can find solid options there for about $200 to $250. I was gonna bring up the Threadripper stuff and Threadripper 3 stuff, but honestly, that gets really expensive really fast. And since you specifically said Ryzen, then that's why I stuck with the desktop stuff. That said, the reason I'm recommending X570 is because you get full PCI Express Gen 4 support, not only from all the PCIe lanes going to your expansion slots, but also through the chipset. And if you're doing video editing or a lot of capture, storage is going to be a concern for you. You're probably gonna want a lot of it. You're probably gonna wanna have expansion capabilities. So when it comes to M.2 slots, and connection for high-speed NVMe drives, I think X570 is a little bit better suited for that. Again, the only reason I might recommend looking at Threadripper, it's a big step up in your initial cost, but if you really want to do a crazy storage configuration, Threadripper is the way to go because you have 64 PCI Express Gen 4 lanes instead of 20 plus 4, so that's a lot more and you can connect a lot more drives to that. Zoza Todorovsky asks, what software do the Founders Edition use? I always bought MSI products and use Afterburner software. So I sort of interpreted this as what software would you use to overclock an NVIDIA Founders Edition? I'm also assuming that you're talking about the 30 series, but I guess this would technically apply to any of the NVIDIA Founders Edition cards. The short answer is I typically use MSI Afterburner. As you can see from this AnandTech quote, which I'm sure is very recent, Afterburner is the gold standard of overclocking utilities. They probably said that in like 2009 or something like that, but that's okay. You can download it straight from the MSI website. It's pretty well maintained, and one of the most is it also installs Riva Tuner. And if you've ever watched one of those videos where they're playing a game and then up in the corner they have different colored statistics for like frame rate and CPU frequency and GPU frequency and all that, that's usually typically done with Riva Tuner. Riva Tuner can go in and hook stats from other software like Hardware Info, and then it can display them on screen. And it's got a pretty wide range of stuff you can do as far as changing the color and size and what's displayed and everything. So it's pretty full-featured. The other thing about Afterburner is since MSI manufactures both AMD and NVIDIA cards, it will work to install and manage or overclock your graphics cards, whether you're using an AMD Radeon or an NVIDIA card. That said, if you're not using an MSI graphics card, but you still have, a GeForce RTX 3080, like a Founders Edition or whatever, the basic functions in just about any overclocking utility should work for adjusting stuff like GPU clock speed and fan speed. If you have a specific card from a specific manufacturer, like EVGA for example, then using EVGA's Precision X overclocking software might be a better option for you because that might have plugins for stuff that's unique to that card, like controlling the RGB lighting, for example. The overclocking software that I've used the most would be Afterburner, followed up, I think, by EVGA's Precision X, although Precision X only works for NVIDIA cards. And there are software utilities from Gigabyte that I forget what it's called, Asus, which is called GPU Tweak, which I never really fell in love with. Zotac has one and Galax has one and stuff. It's just MSI kind of early on established Afterburner, and they do a really good job maintaining it and stuff, so that's that's the one I go for. So I guess you already had the answer to your question, but I've talked about it further now. So there. Last question is not a question. These are some comments from last month's video, because in last month's Probing Paul, the comment that I got the most was, I had no idea that if I tell Windows 10 to shut down, it does not actually shut down. It goes into a deep sleep or a hibernate mode, which is part of the Windows Rapid Start function. You can go into the Windows settings and disable that if you want to, but for most people, it's not really a big deal. If you actually want to do like a full shutdown and restart of your computer, like going from a cold boot, you can just use the restart function, and that works for stuff like if you've just run through a Windows update or something like that. But as pointed out by Joshua Chesney here, as well as Sigurd Flatten, you can hold the Shift button down while you click Shutdown in the Windows 10 shutdown menu, and then it will do the full shutdown. So that's an option. I will use this opportunity once again to plug my video called The Best Way to Access Your BIOS or UEFI, which I have previously lamented didn't get a whole lot of views, but it's actually kind of blown up, and I have recent comments on it. So I feel like YouTube picked this up at some point and was like, hey, this is a useful video and people like it, and it got some more recommendations. So thank you for any of you who did check that out. I will link it in the description because it has some other useful tips besides holding Shift while you select restart. If you do that, it pulls up this menu, and then you can click troubleshoot, and then that can let you do some stuff like accessing your UEFI directly on a reboot, or accessing like safe mode, which is also really useful in a lot of situations, like if you need to run DDU to do a full wipe of your display drivers. Nice additional tip though is that Shift plus restart is one thing, Shift and shutdown is another, and you can force your computer to do the actual full shutdown. So thank you for those comments and follow-ups, and that is going to wrap it up for this video. If you want the next one to check out that tips video. There's some other tips in there that I think people found useful. Thank you so much for watching this video though, and if you want to leave me questions once again for next month, or probably just a couple weeks from now, leave those down in the comment section below. While you're down there, maybe hit the thumbs up button if you enjoyed this video, subscribe to my channel if you're not already, and of course check out my store at paulshardware.net, where you can buy shirts, mugs, pint glasses, and other super awesome merchandise. Help and support my channel and get yourself cool stuff at the same time. Thank you guys so much once again for watching this video. We'll see you in the next one.